Hi, this is Lauren Rose from the It Hurts to Mom podcast. Did you know that up to 80% of our physical pain is actually from emotional pain? Don't miss your opportunity to get my new workbook called Exploring How Your Emotions Relate to Your Physical Pain. In it, you'll consider how trauma, trapped emotions, grief, and lack of forgiveness might be contributing to your chronic pain. This is not to say your pain isn't real. Actually, it's the opposite. Your pain, emotional and physical, is very real. It's only to say that there's a significant mind-body connection that most of us don't realize. Get your workbook today for only $7 at ithurtstomom.com under the shop category, because once you determine the connection, you might be surprised at the extent that emotions are contributing to your pain, and then you can start to heal what's trapped inside. And while you're there, don't forget my freebie, 30 Ways to Relieve Pain Without Taking a Pill, at ithurtstomom.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking about self-care, or as our guest calls it, self-maintenance. Our guest is Hnatiuk, a renowned yoga and mindfulness teacher, life coach, and speaker who's devoted to helping busy, overwhelmed moms be the women they most want to be. Thank you for coming on, Tina.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Prior to what I'm doing now, I was a life coach and yoga and mindfulness teacher. However, my focus was more with professional women and leadership. And once I had my son, I realized is really hard to mom. Motherhood is not all that it's promised to be. And I had a difficult childbirth with him, and I had PTSD, PPD, and PPA. And as I was struggling through it, and in complete denial, because I had all of the tools, like as a life coach, and I'm a total nerd when it comes to psychology and positive psychology and neuroscience. Like I had all of the tools. I just couldn't face that I was struggling the way that I was. And one day my husband came up to me and was like, "Your best friend called me and said that you're drowning. Is it true?" And it was like two things at once. It was a relief because there was a name for it. It's like, yeah, I actually am. This is out in the open. I don't have to pretend anymore that everything's fine. I'm sure I did a terrible job of pretending, but and then the other thing was this intense shame, because I felt like it shouldn't have been me. Like somehow this should have not happened to me. I was beyond that. So the good thing about this that happened was that it forced my husband and I to have some real conversations about my needs, which of course I had completely put to the side. I was given this new baby and trying to struggle with my own internal things that, resulting from such a difficult birth, and extreme sleep deprivation. My son didn't sleep at all. He slept 11 hours of 24, none of them consecutively, and still trying to do everything and even working and stuff. So I had such an extreme self-abandonment at that point. And I remember thinking, nursing in those wee hours of the morning with my little baby, thinking, oh my gosh, like, is this now my life? From like a really thriving, exciting career and a lot of autonomy and independence to now feeling I was completely tethered and struggling. And so that conversation was great because it allowed me to refocus and do the things that I know I needed to do, because I knew that my suffering and pain, a large part of it was this self-abandonment and needing time to reconnect to myself and feeling like me again. So of course I'm a mom now and I love my son, but also we all need this part of ourselves that is also true and important. And so I started getting more help from him and requesting more help, and we set up times that I could take care of myself and go for runs. And I made a point of moving my body more, even with my son around, meditating and doing the things I knew I needed to do. And within a month, my symptoms were gone. And so,
Wow.
yeah. And, like it's uncomfortable because there was a part of me that was like, if you were a good mom, you wouldn't need to do this. There's that voice that says, well, if you were a good mom, you could just be able to focus on your family and not need anything, which is such a terrible lie that women are fed, like that somehow our needs don't matter or that they're less than the people around us. And, yeah, so that resulted in the birth of what I do now, which is I have an online yoga membership site for busy women and moms. And I also have courses to support moms through this. So mindfulness for moms and codependency and boundaries for moms, things like this, just to help us through this. And also that are bite-sized because most of us don't have a lot of support. So what can you do in like 5 to 20 minutes that will dramatically make a difference in the way that you feel? So that's what I'm here for now.
Yeah, I love the bite-sized chunks because you're not committed to sitting in front of the computer for an hour because moms don't have the time for that, whether they're working outside the home or not. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And things that are really highly effective. And a lot of the stuff that I do is research-based. So I really want to use things and offer things that I know work. It's and I know work for me and work for the hundreds of moms that also are now a part of my tribe, which is so great, our community.
So that's really cool. Why do you prefer the term self-maintenance instead of self-care? What's the difference?
Well, I think at least the way I interpreted self-care is like going away for a weekend or a
Mm.
spa day or a massage or something kind of luxurious. And self-maintenance is like brushing your teeth. And
Mm.
so, it's the things that you do to care for yourself every day that are not really so sexy. And I think a lot of us, at least I did, interpreted exercise, yoga, meditation, journaling, things that I know I need to feel whole and healthy and happy, but it felt like a luxury. So it would get lumped into that self-care thing. But as soon as I started thinking it as self-maintenance, like actually my body needs to move, my mind needs to quiet, my heart needs an outlet, then, and I need ways to reconnect to me to feel like a human being and function optimally for myself and my family, then it can't be a luxury. It has to be something that I do daily. And it doesn't have to take long. Like a lot of the things that make a big difference and impact in our life, they take very little time, like brushing your teeth, meditation. You can meditate for 5 minutes and it's proven to rewire your brain. Like it doesn't, as long as it's done consistently, most of the things will have a bigger impact than, the one-off, the one yoga class at a studio a week. But if you do 5 minutes of yoga a day, you'll increase your flexibility. You'll start sleeping better. It improves your mood and increases your happiness baseline, all of this. It's just making it a priority. And so I feel like maintenance is allows us to lump those things in that bucket. So it feels more accessible.
That makes sense because I know self-care is such a buzzword, and we do think about things like bubble baths or going to a spa, and that's not something that everybody can do or not everybody has time for. Some of it's not even something some people are interested in. Some people don't even like bubble baths or
Me too.
spas.
I don't like it either. I would way rather get outside for a walk and a bubble bath.
Yeah, so everybody's different. And I love the fact that you said that we need to be doing it daily.
Mhm.
So I have this analogy. For me, self-care, self-maintenance, let's say you're swimming and you're underwater. If you wait until your lungs are at full capacity to come up for water, you're going to come up and you're going to gasp for air.
Mhm.
And when you go back down, your body is not going to be calm and relaxed and fulfilled. You're just going to be in straight up survival mode, fight or flight mode. But
Mhm.
if we come up for air on a regular, consistent basis, we're actually getting the benefits of that oxygen going back in. Our body is not in fight or flight mode. It's not just trying to survive underwater. So I think daily is really important. And it sounds so simple, these things that you're talking about. Why do you think so many moms struggle with self-maintenance?
Well, I think part of it is just culturally and societal expectations of women and moms is that we are seen as or expected to be caregivers, and not just caregivers part-time, like this is becomes an identity. And so that's hard, I think, for women themselves, because if we take on this role as an identity when they're separate, you know, like a role is something you do. It's like when you say you're a doctor, you're not a doctor when you go home, or a police officer, like to your family, you're a person. But for mothers, I think a lot of us take this on as an identity, is who we are. And so we have a hard time separating that. And the role of motherhood that most of us have been fed is self-abandonment at all costs. Everybody else is more important than you. If there's a scrap, you can take that, but there's never scraps of time left, so forget about it. And that we essentially are here to just serve others. And if you want any more than that, you're selfish. And it's like the bad word for women, you know, it's like, is there a worse cuss word for a woman than selfish? And then we do it, and then, you know, we compare ourselves to others, and we have a social media that feeds us what the perfect mom is, and the bar just keeps going higher and higher. And I imagine when you reflect on how you were parented versus even how you parent your own kids, it's so different. The expectations of our mothers versus the mothers that we know and who we're expected to be. Like, the expectations are so high. And so I feel like that's a big part of it. And so to try and maintain that, we just keep putting ourselves last, and then we're resentful and burning out. And then there's this feeling of failing, like we're not doing enough because we can't do enough, because it's not even possible. And then and then there's this feeling of emptiness, like we have been lied to, I think, you know, the sense of fulfillment that's supposed to come from motherhood. And we realize fulfillment is not only going to come from a role. We also have to have these lives and interests and take care of ourselves and still maintain our personhood.
And I think that's important to show our children too. For the first, you know, few years of my daughter's life, I struggled with some codependency, and definitely I enjoyed my identity as being her mom. But as she's gotten older, it's been good for me to have my own interests and different hobbies that she's not involved in, but she can see that I'm enjoying. And I think it's good for our kids to see that we're, you know, putting ourselves first some of the time, because if we're not putting ourselves first sometimes, we can't be the best mom that we can be to take good care of our children, right?
I also think the important piece, I 100% agree. And I think another important piece is that, what are we modeling? Like, are we showing them that this is what's expected of them? And I'm a mother to a boy, and I'm very aware of what is he going to be expecting from other women then, you know, and what is he going to feel is his role in a family unit when he gets there, has his own family, if he chooses to have one. And so I want him to have and also, if I never rest, if I never say, I need some alone time, let's have some quiet time, you read a book, I'll do this, and he doesn't know what that looks like, then how is he going to do that in his own life? And I think that's, you know, I want him to have these skills of not feeling like he constantly has to be doing, and also not feeling like other people have to constantly be doing, you know, that it's okay to just do things that you like and not constantly have to bend to everybody else.
What are some ways that you encourage women, you know, practically, to carve out that 5 to 20 minutes a day to do some self-maintenance tasks?
Well, a couple of things. The one thing I encourage is that, like, routine is everything. You know, if you want to make any changes in your life, your habits are the ones that do it. And it doesn't have to be long. Like I said, like, if you just sat on your mat every day, you just started there and just taking 3 deep breaths like that, and you did that consistently, that can grow into something else. The consistency is the most important. And in those 3 breaths, you're regulating your nervous system, you're coming back, taking a moment to calm yourself down, you're coming back to yourself, and it can allow you to move forward. But the big thing is consistency. So even within my online membership group, we have a private Facebook group where we do regular 30-day challenges, and I put everybody into teams, because we're rarely accountable to ourselves, right? We were so trained to look after each other. And so it ensures that everybody completes it and they all get the benefits. And you just have to do 5 minutes. That's it. And that 30 days can then extend further, you know, like then they can continue to support each other. But the biggest thing is just like those habits, building those habits, and scheduling that time in for yourself. So making that the priority of your day is, how am I going to get those 5 minutes in for me? And I think also the other thing that's really important, a practical thing, is to have a conversation with your family, because if you are the primary caregiver, you're also the one who sets the routines. So why wouldn't you include yourself in it? And that means that there needs to be some conversation of how can you get the support to support you in your own needs. And in my experience, initially, sometimes there can be a little bit of pushback, not because your family doesn't love you, but because it's change, and change can be uncomfortable for everybody. But it's just a routine and everybody adapts. It doesn't take long as you just stay consistent with it, you know? And as your family sees your commitment, they get on board. And I can tell you, my husband is my biggest cheerleader, 100%. Like, he's the one who's, when we have a day off and we're all together, where he's like, what time do you want to go for a run? What time do you want to do this? And that's how we support and love each other. And I think that's it wasn't always like that. You know, there were times that it was resentful because he's stuck with childcare in difficult moments and I'm not available, you know, and, but now they're used to it, you know.
No, those are great practical tips. Make sure it's written down on your calendar, your digital calendar, whatever you use to mark down your routine, and then getting your family on board and involved in creating that routine. Those are great.
Mm-hmm.
So in a blog post from January 31st of 2022, you talk about how healthy it is to cry. And I loved this blog post because I'm big on feeling emotions, and I'm a big proponent of crying. You
Mm-hmm.
said you can imagine emotions like a tunnel. You have to go all the way through and get to the light at the end. I thought that was so profound. So talk to us a little bit about why it's so important to fully feel our emotions.
Oh, well, that comes to neuroscience and mindfulness, all of that stuff. Well, so that theory actually comes from the book Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. It's a fantastic book, by the way. I highly recommend. But they talk about emotions like just like that, like a tunnel. And emotions, I think sometimes we have this idea that emotions are these like things floating around. They're kind of ethereal. They're not really real. But the reality is that emotions connect to every major system in our body. So if you have a strong emotion, your body reacts to that emotion. And, you know, if it's a stress response, for example, it fires things in the brain, which starts to affect our digestive organs. It affects our heart rate, our blood pressure, everything. And so they're not some like, you know, something that's happening to us. Or there's this idea that we are thinking beings who occasionally have an emotion, but it's actually the opposite. We are emotional beings who occasionally think. And their emotions are reactive and they influence us. They influence how we think, what we do, our bodies. And when we have emotions, the best way to manage them or to deal with them is to let them move through, because otherwise they can get stuck. So, for example, frozen anger becomes resentment. You know, how many times do we not speak up? Especially women, we often tend to be afraid of big emotions like that. So we don't say that made me angry. We stuff it down. And then we look at our partner and we're like, you, there's the resentment that sets in. Frozen sadness becomes depression. And so when we allow them to move through us, and it doesn't mean you have to talk to anybody or do anything, it's just becoming the container for those emotions, feeling them fully, breathing through it, not having any judgment, letting go of the thoughts and the stories that are perpetuating it, because otherwise it can just make it last longer. And then, and feeling it as a bodily sensation. So for example, anger is like heat rising. Anxiety can often feel very tight very knotted. I know for me, it feels very solid. Grief feels hollow and heavy and like a sinking feeling. So there's like a tangible sensation to emotions. Love feels expansive and open through the chest. And being aware and feeling the emotions. And then often, if we do not attach the story and you just allow yourself to breathe through it and imagine yourself as the container, and you can imagine yourself to be as big a container as the emotion needs, it passes through and then it's over. But when we don't, it starts to affect our physiology. And that's when we get things like chronic stress that will impact us and create disease, because our bodies are also really smart. So if you are constantly under stress, then your blood pressure goes up and down, and eventually it goes up and down so much that your body's like, might as well just keep it up here. It's easier, you know? And so now you have a blood pressure problem. Same thing with digestive issues. Your upper and lower digestive tract start to move at different times. So instead of moving smoothly, one speeds up, one slows down, which creates IBS. So, you know, there's all of these things, and that's from your emotions, you know, they're not something small, they're very real.
Yeah, and stuffed emotions can also create chronic pain. Experts say between 50 and 80% of physical pain is actually trapped emotional pain. And that's an enormous percentage of physical pain that's actually from emotional pain. And I deal with that myself because I grew up in an environment where we couldn't express our emotions. So I just learned to stuff them all down. And when some traumas occurred in my life, I stuffed them all down and just tried to move on, and it's created a lot of physical pain in my body that I'm trying to work through. So I don't want anybody to just lightheartedly ignore how important it is to cry and let your emotions out. Like sometimes when my daughter cries and there's nothing I can do to console her because what she's sad, she's sad. I mean, that's all there is. I don't ever tell her, don't cry or stop crying, baby, it'll be okay. I tell her, you know, feel those tears, like really feel them. You know, that's the only way she's going to get through it. And the same for us. Like if we don't let the emotion fully move through us, yeah, physiologically it creates all these changes in our body, all the sorts of things that you talked about, and pain and depression and all sorts of things. It's really important.
Yeah, and there is definitely a link with trauma and emotional pain to things like fibromyalgia and trauma and all of those physical manifestations. Like, this is science. And of course, these are things that are also a lot of the medical field look at as kind of like unexplainable, but it's because it's emotional. Like, you can't measure it the same way, but you definitely feel it.
Absolutely. I know some doctors still don't think fibromyalgia is real, but I assure you, as someone
It
who
is real.
developed it a few years ago, it's very real. And definitely there's a lot of a trauma factor in a lot of people, like you said, that have fibromyalgia.
I
And
wonder too, and there's more and more research on this as well, if part of it is because it's often associated with women, and women have not been taken seriously in medicine for a long time. Like, they didn't even test
right.
medicines on women's bodies up until like a couple
I
decades
know.
ago. It's so insane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I've had at least one doctor who just completely disregarded my actual x-rays that said I had arthritis and degeneration, and just said, you got fibromyalgia. And this is before I actually had fibromyalgia.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I've got 6 or 8 imaging reports that tell you I have arthritis, and you're telling me I don't have arthritis. I didn't say that because I was too intimidated and too
Mhm.
frustrated. I just left, and I was irate. I was so mad. Now,
Mhm.
obviously never saw him again, but he just disregarded everything I was trying to tell him.
Yeah, you're not alone in that. It is a very common thing, and particularly for pain, that somehow our pain doesn't count or it doesn't matter. We're
Mhm.
routinely not prescribed enough medication to manage pain, and it's, I don't know. It's weird. It's an unfortunate situation that hopefully now, as more and more attention is put to it, will be shifting.
I hope so, because it's not fair that if a man were to go and say the exact same thing, a male doctor would likely take him seriously.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're seen as so emotional and delicate and just can't handle life.
There you go.
It's overreacting, of course.
So, sort of on that same topic, you had a blog post on October 15th of 2021 where you talked about some ways that our society is failing moms. I think that's one way society is failing women. But do you remember what else you talked about in this blog post?
I could give you a whole novel on how I feel like society is failing women. I don't remember the topic of that one particularly, but I do feel like women are not supported enough in any way. And a constant struggle is like childcare. Women never have enough childcare, which
Oh, yeah.
means that, yeah, because then how do you work? And a lot of women, we want both. And there's nothing wrong with that, like,
Mhm.
and the argument of, well, then you shouldn't have had kids is like, would you say that to a father? Like,
Yeah.
these are things that would never, ever be said to men, but they are to women. And because the expectation meant is complete self-abandonment. So unless that you should have to sacrifice everything for this one role. And men do not. So I often when I look at the inequality, and I mean, like, I am in the water when you talk about I don't know if you've ever heard this little parable of, like, there's this old fish swimming through the water and he sees two fish and he
Mhm.
says, "Hey fellas, how's the water today?" And the two young fish look at each other and they're like, "What's water?" And I I feel like because it's just there, it's around them all the time. Why would they know it? It's, for us, it would be like air. And
Mhm.
I think that's also around a lot of our cultural norms and expectations of gender roles. And we often don't see them until we are either so upset or we're treated so bad. Like in your case with that doctor, if you were a man, it would have been a different situation. And I feel like it's a lot like that with women. With childcare, women are the ones who have to sacrifice their careers. We're the ones who are
Mhm.
also carrying the invisible load of motherhood. We're also, not only are we trying to find childcare, but then we're managing that. We're managing all the appointments. We're managing everything in the household. Women on average do still 2 times the amount of housework and child work than our partners do. And if you are a higher earner than your spouse, you're actually going to do 2.5 times that to make up for being a higher earner than your partner. I'm not even kidding you. And
Wow.
if you're a part-time working mom, you
Mhm.
actually work 2 full-time jobs essentially, because you will still shoulder the entire burden of childcare and looking after the home on top of working. It doesn't mean that your housework goes down. It's actually the opposite. You're still doing more, and then feeling guilty because you're not around enough. So it's like, we can't win. You can't win the way things are right now. And one of the ways I counter that in my own mind is I ask myself, what would this be like for my husband? And I've got an
Mhm.
amazing husband. Like, it's not, all of this is my mental construct, and a lot of it is what society kind of expects of us, that I've internalized, and that just what the expectations. But often ask, would this be something that would happen to my husband? Or what would my husband do in this situation? So for example, with self-maintenance, like, would he think twice about saying, I'm going to go to the gym this afternoon? No, he just go. Or I'm going to sign
Mhm.
up for hockey with my buddies. Whereas, like, for me, at one point, I would ask myself, essentially wanting to ask him permission. Whereas
Right.
prior to having children, I would have never done that. I would just do whatever. But now it's like, oh, can you look after our kid? Where he would be like, yeah, you're looking after our kid, I'm taking off. And as soon as I shifted that mindset, like, it made such a world of difference. And it made no impact for him. He has no idea that this is how I
Mhm.
think. And he's totally happy to take our kid anytime. But it's what was happening within me. And that's that water, like that internalized cultural expectation of self-abandonment and codependency.
Yeah, I had a lady on recently who talked about the fair play method.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think if any listeners want to go back and listen to that episode, Valerie Recor came on and talked about the fair play method, which is basically a way of making things more fair at home for the wife slash mother, getting your kids and your spouse to do more things around the house. And they even have a concept, I think it's called unicorn space, where
Hmm.
you go and do something that makes you happy apart from your family and your kids, and
Yeah.
how precious and important that unicorn space is in your life.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that's, something that um, I can't speak for my husband, but when I watch him, that's a natural thing that he would do. Like he knows that he wants to do this. And whereas I don't think it's something that women often think about for themselves. It's like, well, if everyone else's schedules is taken care of and this is this, then, maybe I can take this time. But
Mhm.
we we need to be whole people, like it shouldn't, I cannot get past that idea of like, why should my husband have a different life or mindset than me, like we're two really amazing smart people who have interests, and we happen to share a child, so why do I have to give up everything else of me and he just gets to live his life as though nothing happened? It's not fair. We still have, we're still whole people. And as much as I embrace and love motherhood, I also love other things. And I shouldn't have to feel guilty for wanting to do other things for
No,
myself and everybody else, right?
yeah, I think it's perfectly healthy of you to want to have an identity outside of, being a mom, outside of your child, because that right there is, when you take on being a mom as your identity, and that's the only part of you that's important, that, leads to the codependency and what they call enmeshment,
Yes.
or yeah, yeah. So that's, if you're dealing with that, just look up enmeshment and codependency. I think I deal more with enmeshment than codependency, but to me, they're very similar. So
Yeah. Well, with codependency, it's really about putting everybody else's needs and wants above your own, and that their problems, their emotions, their whatever is like your main focus. And then
mhm,
we don't look at our own, which is what happens there is like, oh, I'm fine, it's good. But what about you? Tell me what's happening
right.
with you. What are your problems? How can I help you? How can I help? And then, meanwhile, we are feeling terrible or feeling resentful because we aren't taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, and we can't be the best mom we can be if we're not taking care of ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah.
What are some of the top, self-maintenance tasks you would suggest for our listeners to just start with, maybe 5 minutes a day?
Well, as a yoga teacher and a mindfulness teacher, those are my top ones, but I know that's not what interests everybody. But one of the reasons I love mindfulness is it's research based,
Mhm.
and it is effective in as little as 5 minutes a day. And with consistency, you can rewire your brain and one of the cool things about mindfulness that's different than other interventions like exercise is that you can do that for 6 or 8 weeks and it'll permanently change the structure of your brain. There is no
Yeah.
other intervention that will do that. Like once you reach a certain peak of maybe you work out for 6 weeks and you get a certain physique or whatever, but you have to maintain that then. Like it doesn't,
Hmm.
it's not like you're done. Whereas with mindfulness, I'm not saying you should just do it for 6 weeks and quit because the benefits
Right.
just continue, but it's one of those things that you will actually change. Like it's a really powerful intervention and will help with so many mood disorders. It can help with anxiety, depression, PTSD. It helps you sleep better, self-awareness. It increases your happiness, compassion, self-awareness, all like it has so many benefits, immunity. and very effective in small chunks of time. I also really love yoga because it helps us get into our bodies, which our bodies are not only, you know, like the home of the soul and all this, but and increases flexibility and strength. But I think it's also a way to reconnect to ourselves. Like we actually get to feel what it's like to be inside of this body that we inhabit, and in a mindful and loving, compassionate way. And we need more of that. So that's the way I tend to teach yoga, no matter what style, is this way of coming back to the self in a kind way. But I think if it's even, you know, like going outside, taking a walk around the block, glimmer hunting, as they say, or beauty hunting, which is like taking a few moments to look for beauty around you. I'm a huge proponent of, or advocate of, gratitude practices in a very specific way. So it's a positive psychology book, it'll come to me. But so what they talk about there, how to get the biggest benefit of gratitude, is to scan the last 24 hours for 3 positive moments and then feel them again as though they're happening now. So you get this double dopamine hit. You're also training your mind to look for positive moments, which means that it'll start to see more even in the moment, which is really great. And which will increase your happiness baseline, just because you start to notice more of the positive around you. And I love doing it before going to sleep, and I fall asleep with like all of these happy thoughts, and I have a good sleep. And it reminds us also how good life is, you know, and hopefully it helps us connect to the people in the world around us. But I think anything that makes you feel good and like you, so reading a book for 10 minutes, just making that time for yourself, journaling, sitting by a window and having a cup of tea or coffee alone, ensuring that you have breaks in your day. One of the moms that I used to live across the street from was like, if I had a 9-to-5 job, I would have a lunch break. But I have 3 under 4. So we have quiet time. So we all get a break from each other. And I thought that is so brilliant. Just like taking a break for yourself and feeling okay with it, and knowing that it's good for your kids too. So, but the main thing is just finding something that is working for you and then staying consistent with it. And I really believe the biggest, most important takeaway from that, if nothing else, is that you start to break the cycle of codependency, and also that cycle of self-abandonment, because you are stating to the world and to yourself that I am important enough to take this time for myself. It's a way of claiming your stake in a way. And then we don't pass it on to our kids, you know, which is like my biggest motivation. I'm like, please show all this stuff. It's such a mess. Let me do the work so you don't have to. I'll give you other work later.
No, that's beautiful. So thank you so much for coming on. Where can we get more information about you and about what you do?
Sure. So my online yoga membership is quickblissyoga.com. And it's everything in there is 20 minutes or less, very accessible. There's over 260 yoga videos and audio meditations for just about everything, like anxiety, sleep, gratitude, calming. It's great. And that's also where you can join those challenges. And then I also have another website, Hnatiuk.com, which is just my name.com. And that's where you'll find things like mindfulness for kids, a mindfulness for moms, codependency and boundaries for moms, that kind of stuff. So all of those other wonderful little tools.
Awesome. Are you on Instagram or Facebook?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just my handle, TinaNhatiuk.com or Tina
Okay,
Hnatiuk.
Okay. And I'll have all this in the show notes so everybody knows how to spell everything.
Great. I know my last name is kind of, I did not marry up with changing my last name.
That's right. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, or life advice. For my freebie, 30 Ways to Relieve Pain Without Taking a Pill, go to ithurtstomom.com/tips. Or if you have any comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, just email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish you all a blessed and pain-free day.